under Blewett, the third school of law. It used to be the University of Montana School of Law back in the day when I went to school here, but there also wasn't this fancy building back in the day when I went to school either. So things have changed over time, but one thing that hasn't changed is the Margery Hunter Brown Indian Law Clinic. And the Indian Law Clinic has been a part of this school since the early 70s. It is named after an amazing woman, an amazing Indian tribal law advocate. And the clinic itself hosts law students from this law school to originally represent tribal peoples and tribes. And I think now it's a little more narrow in scope. It is only tribal government representation, I believe, that takes place through the Indian Law Clinic. But it's an amazing opportunity for law students. At some other law schools, clinical opportunities are applied for and they're competitive, and you're not guaranteed a clinical experience. Here at the AB 3, it's the University of Montana School of Law. Here at this school, you are required to be in a clinical experience, and to have an Indian Law Clinic be among them is pretty special. It's something that this school, I think, should be really proud of. And so when Stella was interested, expressed an interest in learning more about tribal history and particularly how it relates to the law here, as part of her residency, we reached out to the Indian Law Clinic, Monty and Kakak Stark, and it just came together that the summer was going to be the time for it. So we're super excited to have Stella. She ups our cool factor because lawyers are cool, and so I think it's a special collaboration, and I'm really excited to welcome Stella here and excited to see the body of work that comes out of this program. To welcome Stella with all of the fanfare, we're going to bring up our new, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the title. What is your
program coordinator?
For open air. How are you?
Thanks, Amy. So welcome, everybody. Stella Nall is a multimedia artist and poet from Bozeman and a first descendant of the Apsáalooke Tribe. She graduated from the University of Montana in 2020 with a BFA in printmaking, a BA in psychology, and a minor in art history and criticism. She now lives and works in Missoula, where she's involved in the community as a member of the WMCI Indigenous Art Advisory Committee by playing in a local band, Crybaby, and by frequently sharing her work through exhibitions, publications, murals, and interactive installations. And on a personal note, I just want to add, Stella was actually the first open-air artist I met on my first week of the job, and so I'm going to always remember she was so kind and so welcoming to me. But now, since I've gotten to know her better, I've also learned that she's also extremely talented, she's very intelligent, and she creates artwork with a rare depth and range. So join me in welcoming Stella Nall.
Thank you so much for coming to this talk today. I'm really excited and unfortunate to be part of this program for a second time. It's really been encouraging and inspiring to me. This lecture is going to primarily be centered around the visual artwork that I do, but I'm also going to squish some of my poetry in between where it comes and fits in, as I've dedicated quite a bit of this residency to working on writing as well. I'm going to start out with some background about myself and a general overview of my practice, and then I'll dive deeper into the work that I do about indigeneity, my experiences as an open-air artist in residence with the Indian Law program at the University of Montana, what I'm working on now, and how this residency has informed my recent projects. At the end, depending on how much time there is and what people are interested in, I can either read even more poems or we can do questions or both of those things. All right, so this is me with my 800-pound pet rabbit that lives in my studio apartment with me, and his name's Hoagie, and he was drawn by a previous open air alum, Courtney Blazon, and I really love this, so I thought I'd share it with you today. My work ranges a lot in media, and I use it to address a pretty wide variety of themes. So in all of my work, I value aesthetics, critical thought, and concept, but most of all, my focus is connection. This is sometimes connection to others, to the earth, to my own identity and the history of my ancestors. And I initially thought today I would just talk about the work I'm directly generating through this residency, but I thought it could also be good to talk about the rest of my practice and the things that led me to the work I'm doing today. So to talk with you, I've sorted my practice into 3 main categories or reasons why I make the work that I do, and I highlighted a few projects from each category. Okay, so the first one is for fun. The work that I do for fun, I won't talk about for very long, but I just wanted to put it out there that I find it so important to give myself space for doing things simply because I want to and I enjoy it. I make art because I love to. I really enjoy learning new processes, experiencing different medias, colors, and formal elements, and I love to make things that make me laugh and hopefully that make other people laugh sometimes too. Humor has a really big place in Indian country and a big place in my life and the work that interests me. And a lot of the time I like to incorporate humor into my work because I know that laughter is good medicine, and I believe it's one of the best ways to bring people together. So these ones are an example of that. They're the inner workings of vegetables, and the one on the left is a carrot, and it has 2 hearts because it cares quite a lot. I really like eggs because they're so squishy and I love the colors. So sometimes I just blankly make egg art. There's not too much to say about this one. I'm pretty new to, or I like to say that I'm pretty new to ceramics because it feels that way, but by now I've been working on it for a few years. And before this residency, I was a resident at Wildfire Ceramic Studio in town. I had such a good experience there. I also recently took a throwing class at the clay studio of Missoula, and that was really awesome too. And this shows up in my ceramics work and also my 2D work, but I really love to use vibrant colors to illustrate these whimsical, sweet, imaginary creatures. And these creatures can kind of be sorted into 2 categories also. Some of these creatures hold significant symbolism, and they're in many ways what I view as the most impactful work that I do, but some of them, well, I just make for fun. Like this little cow has hands, and I thought that was good about it. Or this one is a bison, and it's also a caterpillar, and it's called Think of the Squishy Walking Sounds, so I thought we could all take a moment to think of them. Okay. My pet rabbit, Hoagie, also appears in a lot of the work that I do for fun, and that's what he looks like, so you can see I get into realism sometimes. Oh, there he is again. That's what he looks like. And I really try to do my best to limit the consumption of new materials in my art making, and I think these creatures are a good example of that. And I started doing this process during my first residency with Open Air when I was placed at Home Resource. The panels that I use are made at Home Resource in town here from old reclaimed wooden doors, and I often use house paint from Home Resource or from leftover projects like murals that I do, and then I use printmaking tools to scoop away the texture. And I carve these creatures from memory, and sometimes you can tell, like with this one, because bison are usually standing in snow or grass or something, so I had to kind of guess on what their feet looked like, and because I don't know if anyone's ever seen their feet, they might have hooves or little hands, and I wasn't sure, so that's why they're hiding on the bottom of the panel there. And this is another carved bison piece that I made recently, and this is kind of a shameless plug to lure you into going to an upcoming exhibition, but it's living right now at Radius Gallery, and it's going to be in their upcoming show, Watching Until the Watching Turns to Feeling, which opens July 29th. So I'd love if you all go visit the creatures there. And to finish my part on the artwork that I make for fun, I thought I'd read a couple of the poems that I made for fun, just to kind of wrap up that section. So this one's called Salty, and it's a love poem of sorts. Salty. Is love something consumable? It certainly consumes. If ours were food, yours would be a chocolate most decadent, or perhaps a fine wine. Mine? Pre-chewed gum salted. And this one is a little less deprecating, but I also just made it for fun. It's called Be Free, Earlton Scree. There once was a man named Earlton Scree. He lived in a house on a hill by a tree. Each time he blinked, he'd stay for a while, his eyes closed tight, his lips in a smile. Under his lids, what did he see? Whatever it was, it filled him with glee. He liked it much more than that house by the tree. With its yard to mow, its apples to seed, the sun in his eyes, the pain in his knees, the mortgage to pay, the dishes to clean. The lines on his face, they grew deeper each day. The more that he blinked, the longer he stayed. One day he woke at his usual time and opened the windows, pulled up the blinds. He opened the door to check on the tree, to step outside and see what he could see. Whatever it was, he wasn't impressed, so he went back inside, no bother to dress. He left open the door and sat on the floor. That world out there, he didn't want anymore. His breathing felt heavy, his eyes felt dry. With a lump in his throat, he wanted to cry. But up from the floor, first to his knees, he paused there a bit as though waiting to sneeze. The air, it felt still on that house on the hill, thick with intention waiting to spill. Then up from his knees stood Earlton Scree. So fast did he stand, he felt almost a breeze. No more ache in his heart, no more throb in his feet, no more wishing, no longing, no waiting for heat. For Earlton Scree, he could finally be free. One last look through the window and he closed the blinds, shut the door, left the outside behind. Back into bed under blankets he sighed. He closed his eyes, but not blinking this time. The rest of his life he would live in his mind. Okay, and then my last poem that I wrote just kind of because is also a love poem, and it's called Thinking of You. Thinking of you is watching an egg cracked over a wool sweater. It is a sponge dropped in tomato soup. Honey on a dry tongue that licked the seal of an empty envelope. It is a crochet hat. It is a powwow drum. It is a heartbeat. It is my heartbeat. You are my bird made of ants, a pen that writes with syrup instead of ink. So sweet. Yes. Okay. Back to the visual art. So, the next reason that I make art is to process. And I do want to put a trigger warning for the rest of this talk as we'll get into the more serious work that I do, as I will discuss MMIW, personal and intergenerational trauma, cultural erasure, and addiction. I know that these are really difficult topics to engage with, so I definitely understand if anyone wants to excuse themselves at any time. In this part, it's hard to feel like I'm not oversharing, so I don't usually talk about this part of my process, but I think that sometimes the issues I'm wanting to discuss in my work can be easily compartmentalized or swept away if they're not attached to someone you personally know. So I'm going to share a little bit about my family and our history, and how it's impacted the artwork that I make today and my interest in Indian law. So I touched on this a little bit in the introduction, but my brother and I are the first generation of I actually skipped my introduction because I thought everyone introduced me really well. Reading my notes. Okay, so for the first time I'll tell you, my brother and I are the first generation of my family to be denied tribal enrollment. We're the first generation to live off reservation. We're the only of our cousins who do not fluently speak our language. These experiences have at times been very isolating. Navigating them myself and watching my brother struggle with them as well has significantly impacted my life, my interest in Indian law, and the work that I make today. Along with the tangible implications that being disenrolled has had on my life, such as barring me from voting on tribal matters, participating in Indigenous art markets, applying to grants and fellowships that require enrollment, it has significantly affected me emotionally. It's very painful to be raised in a culture and then denied these things, and it feels pretty bad to be told you're somehow different from all of your ancestors. So I'll read a poem that's a little bit silly, and it's about that. It's called A List of Things That Make Me Sad. It's not too silly. Thinking about people eating alone, soup in the late evening, especially strangers that I've only seen a glimpse of. I'm not sure why, because I quite like soup and being alone. Satin bower birds, when they steal smaller plumage, Not even the bluest bower or the softest drying place could make me feel better about that. Gas stations, pavement, empty dandelions, post-fluff, thrown away toothbrushes, thrown away photographs, settler colonialism. So that's a list of things that makes me sad. And this poem is about the same thing, kind of. It's called Reflections on the Blood Quantum. The day my cousin died, a bird crashed into the window of my mother's house in Alaska. Maybe a sign, she wondered. I think it was goodbye. I smudged the house yesterday, but the feeling didn't go away. I worry that I did it wrong. I worry that the haunting must be something internal, that maybe I should have smoked it instead. All of the family on my mother's side, before my brother and I, are Crow, real Indians enrolled. We're the first members not to have enough blood yet so far no one has split open my veins and tried to check. If they did, what would they find? Is the white blood within me somehow thicker than the red? Is it like oil? Unable to mix, it separates me into fractions. 16 years old, I cut my wrists, perhaps trying to find out. But there was not enough blood to discover anything new and not enough blood to die. A lifetime of being told you're different than your ancestors, that you're not enough, it really starts to add up after a while. I understand that we're a sovereign nation. I understand that we fought hard to make it so, that we're still fighting to protect our language, our culture, our traditions, and that sovereignty is part of it. I understand, I think. But what kind of nation are we if we determine the worth of our citizens on a concept of racial purity? Balake, Dalake, my children, your children, regardless of the legislature. Okay, so that one I've been working on during this residency, so thank you for listening to it. Yeah, so my family has gone through a lot, and the fact that my brother and I were raised with our culture is in many ways quite remarkable. It's a big part of why I use my work to cherish it now and what initially made me interested in Indian law. My grandmother and my great-grandmother were both sent to assimilative boarding schools, and some of the work I've recently been focusing on in this residency and a little bit before it is used to process the intergenerational trauma inflicted by these schools, the effects it's had on our people, and the effects it's had on my family. In addition to these really challenging topics, I also make work about radical joy and celebrate the resilience and power of cultivating community. Which that's how I want to end the talk, is talking about the happy work, so there's just a little bit more of the sad bits. Thank you all for listening to them. So I initially started making poetry to process, and the poems that I shared with you touch on that, but also in addition to my poetry, I use these abstract paintings to process, and they're a significant part of my process too. I'm hoping to come up with a better name for this body of work sometime, but for now I just call them process pieces because they act as a venue for me to work through my feelings. And for this body of work, the experience of creating is more impactful to me than the final product, though I do think quite a bit about aesthetics and colors and formal elements as well while I'm making them. Each piece stems from an experience, emotion, or impactful time in my life, and I begin by thinking of the very first memory of the matter, and then work forward through all the thoughts, recollections, and emotions up until the present. I work on a given piece until I find some sort of peace with myself about it, and then that's when I know it's done. I started making these process pieces also in the first residency I did with Open Air, so this was a back-home resource, and I made a big old process painting there. In addition to using these paintings to sort through my personal life, I believe that making them enables me to deeply invest energy into my other work as a studio artist. Many of the thematic concerns which I address in my art are difficult to engage with emotionally, and I often make these process pieces at the same time as my other projects to keep me from getting too overwhelmed. And it works most of the time. So these are mostly older pieces because I had photos of them that I was happy with, but I'm really excited. I had taken a break from these for a while, and I've made 4 big new ones during this residency, so I'm really excited about that. And the final reason that I make art is to connect. The work that I'm generating through this residency residency mostly falls into this connection chunk here. And I've separated the art that I make about connection into two parts. The first part of the connective work that I do is about connecting with people in the wider community that we live in here in Missoula. And I love to do large-scale installation projects which incorporate direct participation from a bunch of other people. So the first example that I wanted to give about this is a project I did called Love Is, where I took about a year and interviewed as many people as I could. It ended up being about 100. And I asked them the questions: what do you think that love is? Is it different to love versus to be in love with someone? And is there anything else you want to tell me about love? Then I typed all of the letters up, and so that they could be anonymous. So this is like a horrifying picture of this bulletin board I had in my room, just like full of notes from people. But so I typed them all up so they'd be anonymous, and then covered a gallery wall with them. And then during that opening, which was only one day, I created a sound installation with love songs that were submitted from all of the participants. And then I made illustrations for the answers that resonated with me and I felt like I could convey visually. So I was really excited about that project, and it led me into doing more community-based work. And another example of this is a mural I painted in town here that's behind the ZAC. They used to, sorry, I lost my spot here. The intention behind this mural is to cultivate community connection and help amplify perspectives of individuals who have historically or are currently being marginalized. And for this mural, I also reached out to as many people as I could and asked them to send a hand in. I tried to be kind of cheesy about it and asked if anyone wanted to lend a hand. But people were sending me photos of their hands, their favorite colors, and a few words about themselves. And then I illustrated all of the hands on my digitally and wrote up the words they said about themselves and made it onto a freely accessible visual book of all of the hands. And then I painted this big old mural behind the ZAC and recreated all the hands on there so that it could be used as a way to connect with other members of the community. And you could read the visual kind of digital book while you're looking at this and learn about people who are around you who might be mitigating the same issues that you're dealing with, or might be completely unique in their own right. So I'm really passionate about public art, and I've been really fortunate to paint murals, which is just like making the creatures that I love to paint, but on a big scale. I painted this one while in residency with open air, but through a different project over in Kalispell, so I went away and came back and painted these huge bunnies. All right, so the second part of the art that I make about connection is particularly what I've been focusing on with this residency. It's connecting with my culture, my family, my identity, Indigenous history and law, and other Indigenous folks. As I mentioned, my mother and all of my living relatives on her side are enrolled in the Crow tribe. And I was raised as Crow, so that's mostly how I think of myself. And I'm registered as a First Descendant, but under the current enrollment policy of the Blood Quantum, my brother and I are the first members to be disenrolled from the tribe. This has significantly impacted my life, and it's kind of what made me want to get more into Indian law. Because my first introduction to art when I was a kid was watching my mom bead. She's a really talented bead worker, and she's always beading, like, she'll just bring a little pouch of it, and I remember swimming at the pool when I was a kid, she'd be beading and such. She made all of my regalia growing up, and her patterns and colors still influence a lot of the work I'm making today. So some of the work that I make is like that last slide, it's traditional beadwork and regalia, but some of it I use to challenge existing stereotypes and expectations that viewers might hold about what Indigenous art should look like. So I'm hoping that by combining beadwork with other two-dimensional forms of art, such as illustration or painting or printmaking, it might help change the way that people think about beadwork, I hope. And I find that there's often the separation of Indigenous art into the sector of craft rather than like fine art, which there isn't necessarily anything inherently problematic with that, but I do think that I'd love for people to be able to appreciate beadwork. So I'm hoping that by tying it to work they might be already familiar with, they'd be more willing to engage with it on a fine art sphere. The creatures that I imagine for two different reasons. The first one are just for fun, and the second one is what I'm about to talk about right now. I utilize these imagined creatures to discuss a wide variety of topics, including love, grief, joy, and identity. So this piece is about heartbreak, and it's called Stolen Heart, so you can see that one of the fellas took the other one's heart, and now it doesn't have any in it. Well, heartbreak. This one's about longing. This one's called To Seek a Heart Less Complicated. This one's about indecisiveness. And this one's called, Have You Ever Had a Crush? My Stomach is Filled with Ants. And some of the work that I make is political. This piece is about the MMIW crisis, and it's called Balisea Ilishishik, which means my heart is broken. My identity as an Indigenous person today is further complicated because I'm mixed race. And the Crow tribe and many other tribes in the United States utilize this policy called the blood quantum, and they determine your degree of sorry, I got lost there. The Crow tribe and many other tribes in the United States determine tribal enrollment based off of an idea introduced through colonialism called the blood quantum. And the blood quantum is the degree of Indian blood, and it's printed on a fraction of each of the tribal IDs for the enrolled members of my tribe. And I thought this could be interesting to share because it's usually like a very personal thing to apply for your tribe, particularly in my case to be denied enrollment. But I wanted to point out that there's no blood work done in configuring one's blood quantum. It's just visually sorted out by looking at a family tree and writing down fractions on paper, which breaks down our blood based on an arbitrary batch of people who were initially recorded in the United States Census. So you can see, like, my great-grandparents are recorded as half Crow. And there's no standardized way to determine, like, whether someone's half or a quarter or fully Crow. It was just like whatever was written down at the time. So we don't know how this was determined or why, but it's really impacted the way that I live today. Another reason that I'm frustrated with the current system that we use is because tribal enrollment is not determined the same way across all tribes, but the enrollment status is used the same way, and it has the same implication on all of our lives. Many grants, Indian health services, even art events, such as the Indian Art Market in Santa Fe, require enrollment for eligibility. And this doesn't seem fair to me because the standards for determining enrollment are not universal across tribes. And even the other tribes that utilize blood quantum don't calculate it the same. Some use your total degree of Indian blood, so as long as your lineage from the tribe that you're applying to enrollment to can be traced back to the base roll of one of the tribes that you're enrolling to, then any of the ancestry from other recognized tribes counts towards your blood quantum. But the tribes like the Crow tribe only count Crow blood towards our quantum. So our tribal constitution, I kind of got sidetracked into that, hopefully that made sense, but our tribal constitution also prohibits dual enrollment. And you can see here that I have lineage to Cherokee on my father's side, and in addition to Crow on my mom's side, we're also Sioux and Nez Perce. But these connections are not well documented because my mom and my grandparents and my great-grandparents are all enrolled in the Crow tribe. So they had to denounce any claims to other Indian identity or tribal affiliation because of the prohibition on dual enrollment. So this idea of quantifying blood is a component of federal Indian policy that I discuss most in my work. And this is the first piece that I made about it. It's a really, really big woodblock print that I made while I was a student at the University of Montana. My professor lent me these huge wood scooping tools, and then I scooped this big piece of MDF plywood that I got at Lowe's, and we printed it with a steamroller in the parking lot of the Fine Arts Building. And it's titled First Descendant sterile hybridity. It's informed by my experience growing up as the first generation of my mother's family denied enrollment to the Crow tribe due to our current blood quantum requirements. The birds featured in this print articulate an emotional state that I've encountered in response to being asked to prove myself by my own community and those outside it, and falling short or being perceived as not enough. I developed this bird to speak about my experiences as a mixed-race Crow woman and the pressures that I feel under our current policy. The Crow word for ourselves is Apsáalooke, which means children of the large beaked birds. And the birds in this piece are depicted flying towards a larger inaccessible beak, which is symbolic both of the blood quantum required for me to be enrolled in my family's tribe, and also the internalized standards and stereotypes perpetuated by society that dictate what Native Americans should look and act like. My mixed race means I don't meet the federally recognized definition of a Crow citizen, but I participated in traditions and been socially categorized as Indigenous since childhood. So it kind of put me in this strange liminal space, and the mule at the bottom of this piece speaks to this experience as well. A mix of two animals, mules are genetically unable to produce offspring, and while I'm granted First Descendant status by the Crow tribe, were I to have children with someone outside of the tribe or with a lower blood quantum than I have, they wouldn't legally be considered Crow anymore. Additionally, I included the mule because some of my relatives have the last name Yellow Mule, and it was probably referencing a mule deer, but when I was a kid I pictured this type of mule. And because of the hybridity of the creature, it's something that I've grown to associate myself with. And the shapes in the background are elk's teeth, and they're nostalgic to me because they're used in regalia and they're really important to the Apsáalooke. So I was really nervous to make this first piece and to speak out against something that's been pushed on me for my whole life, but I had really good professors and peers in the arts community in Missoula at the time, so I felt like I could express these things. And it really ignited my interest in Indian law. And I feel like, now I'll get into the work I'm making with the current residency. I feel like it's really important to talk about the implications of the policies that we implement beyond what they look like on paper. And one of the reasons I was excited to participate in the Indian Law Clinic is because I'm an artist and I'm not trained in any legal terminology. All of the research that I've done has been based on my own experiences and is self-directed research. As a person with pretty severe anxiety, I tend to doubt my self-efficacy when facing unfamiliar topics, which is something I'm trying to work on, but sitting in on this class has given me the opportunity to learn about these topics that I'm interested in an academic space with supportive peers and faculty who are experts on these issues. So that makes me feel a lot more comfortable to make art about it. The first class that I sat in on took place May 31st to June 3rd, and it was an introduction to American Indian law called Mastering American Indian Law. It looked at the fundamental aspects of American Indian law and provided a basic understanding of the core Indian law principles, both on a federal and tribal level. And I feel like this course helped to familiarize me with the development of foundational concepts around Indian law and to see the continued impact of federal legislation and court actions on tribal governance structures today. This was my first exposure to a law course of any kind, so I was pretty nervous about it, but I felt super welcomed in the program and started making art pretty much like right away from it, which I think was really exciting for me. We read the book Mastering American Indian Law, and I feel like that book really gave me more insight into the topics that I'm trying to, I guess, deconstruct through my visual work. And I'm really excited for the next class that I'm going to sit in on, which takes place July 25th to 29th, and it's called Social Justice Issues in Indian Country, Native American Voting Rights. So I think we can probably imagine why I'm interested in that course. And I'm really excited to further delve into it. So this first piece that I made is, well, I'll start at the top here. This residency was really impactful for me because it acted as an encourage for me to reignite my involvement in these issues. because working on these topics can sometimes feel pretty discouraging, especially when the impacts have such a direct implication on my life. So I kind of drifted away from making work on this topic. And doing this residency really helped encourage me to get back into it. And one of the pieces that I've produced so far doesn't directly relate to Indian law, but I wanted to share it with you now because I was really excited about making it with the residency, because it gave me the time and support to be able to make this piece, because it's a donation piece, and I gave it to the Zootown Community Arts Center for their last Best Print Fest as part of their community portfolio exchange called Shadows. And they do this last Best Print Fest every year, but I haven't been able to participate in the past very much because I'm usually frantically making art and trying to support myself through my work, so I haven't given too many things to 100% donated causes, and I was really excited to have the opportunity to do that through this residency. So with this piece, I was talking to my mom about the prompt shadows one day, and I was thinking about I guess what we think the term shadows means. And my intention here is to highlight an integral part of beading projects, which is often hidden in the shadows or tucked out of sight from the final product, and that's the backing. So people use all sorts of things for beading backing. They use felt and suede and leather and even paper grocery bags, which is what I use here. And I think it's really fun to think about what backing is hidden in the shadows of the most intricate regalia that we wear. And another piece that I finished during this time as my artist in residency, does have to do with Indian law, particularly enrollment and the blood quantum. And it's actually one that I've been working on for about 2 years, which is the longest I've ever worked on a project. So I was really excited when it finally came together during this residency. It's really, really important to me, but I think the reason that it took me so long to make this piece is because I was making it for another member of our community. I'm gonna sip some water. I wanted the imagery to convey all the emotions that I felt about it, but more importantly, I wanted it to properly tell their story. So I'm going to keep some of the details of this story, like the names and specific tribe that's involved, private, to keep the story private for those involved. But this piece is actually the first one that I've made about the blood quantum that instilled hope in me. And I had a really hard time working on it because I was feeling like it's kind of like an uphill battle. But this piece, yeah, it made me feel hopeful, and it made me see that others are doing really important work on this issue. And it made me feel like it's something that actually can be worked on to address. So this piece is about a family who's been affected by the blood quantum being used as a tool for tribal enrollment. The family has 2 daughters, and they're both born to the same parents. When the eldest daughter was born, she was enrolled in the tribe that the mother's enrolled in without difficulty. But when the second daughter was born, they applied to enroll her, and she was denied enrollment. So again, these are 2 sisters that were born to the same parents, one accepted into the tribe and the other disenrolled, or prevented from enrollment. The reason that the tribe stated for denying her citizenship was their blood quantum. Some of the council members decided to change the way that they chose to interpret the tribal constitution. And this new interpretation stated that tribal membership would only be extended to base enrolled descendants with at least 1/4 blood quantum. And that's the point in the story when we initially connected. They were in the middle of this really devastating event, and the outcome was unclear. We didn't know whether she's going to be able to be enrolled or not. But what happened next was incredibly inspiring to me, and I started making this piece while the outcome was unclear, and the mother called a tribal council meeting on behalf of her daughter, and there she stated, "I'm here to respectfully disagree with my younger daughter's denial and ask the council to reevaluate and correct their faulty interpretation for my daughter and all others negatively affected." I thought she really eloquently pointed to all the ordinances in their tribal constitution and showed that utilizing this degree of Indian blood to deny enrollment to future members was not in their constitution. And she stated, if the tribe wishes to deny enrollment based on a revisionary interpretation of our constitution, that decision needs to be made collectively and transparently, with careful consideration for each other and for accordance with the bylaws established by our tribal members. Our enrollment policies should reflect the true philosophies of belonging that our tribe holds, rather than imported blood quantum laws that are meant to erase us. Families and communities establish citizenship and belonging through complex kinship networks, not blood quantum, and we tether ourselves to each other with connections based on blood, naming, marriage, adoption, birthplace, and family, to name a few. Native and non-native historians unanimously agree that blood quantum laws are a tool created by the U.S. government with the single purpose of erasing sovereign Native people. I hope that our tribe recognizes this fact and supports tribal membership policy that reflects our ancestral kinship beliefs and does not take up the tools of those who wish to erase us. That's what she said to her tribal counselor, and said, our tribal members are hungry to be told you belong, you are seen, you are loved, you are one of us, no matter where you go, where you come from. You come from us, and because of that, you're unstoppable. These are the truths spoken to me by my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my parents. These are the truths I speak to my children. Please have the courage to speak these truths too. And those are her words, and she advocated for her daughter and for those who don't have someone fighting on their behalf, and for those who have gotten turned away by this policy or lost. And the tribe was receptive, and they listened, and they chose to value family and love and connection over the blood quantum. And I was so inspired by this experience. Like, when I first painted this piece, the big bird there is the second daughter, when she was cut away from her tribe and from her family. So the line that you can see going through there was initially drawn as a measuring tape with red ink to show that this construct can be used to separate families. And then when we found out that they were actually going to let her be enrolled, I went back and beaded over the whole thing, which is the biggest beading project I've done, and the process of making it was really uplifting for me. And that's mostly what I've been working on in the residency, aside from my writing. Through this story, I just got a lot of hope, and I believe that as sovereign nations, it's in the hands of individual tribes to determine their own methods for determining enrollment. And with the research and understanding that we have about the blood quantum and how we can see that it's been following its original design and steadily diminishing the number of enrolled members, many tribes have started switching back to pre-colonial methods of kinship and family lineage. And I'm in support of these more inclusive systems, as I've directly felt the impacts of holding on to the blood quantum. I believe that being Indigenous is more about family, culture, tradition, and giving back to your community than it is this idea of pure blood. Pure blood calculated through speculation and tracing back to a base census roll. We're sovereign nations, and it's my firm belief that any nation which relies on constructs of ethnic purity, especially when these ideas systematically classify its citizens and strip them of rights, must be questioned and reformed. And that's why I make the work that I do, and I really hope to keep making it for the rest of my career. Oh, thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Sure, I do. So when you've done this residency at the School of Law, and I know it's impacted, from what you said, it's impacted you, and you've learned so much, but like the other students, have they shared with you like what they mean? I mean, having an artist there, what have they told you anything about your impact on them?
Yeah, on the last day of the first class, there was a day to give presentations, and all of the students gave presentations on topics that we learned about, which impacted them. And I chose to share about my art and read some of the poems I've been working on. And I was like so nervous about that. But all of them, after it like came up to me and said really encouraging words, and yeah, I hope that it was impactful to, I guess, see how some of these policies can directly impact our community. Because it's like, if I didn't know about blood quantum, I would have thought it was just a tool that was, I don't know, used for determining enrollment, but wouldn't have realized any of the implications that it has or how it's calculated. And I think being able to talk about that through the class and legal terminology, and then also through visual language, was hopefully helpful for people.
I'm curious about having your DNA done to, if that proves anything. Can you talk about that a little bit?
There's actually been a lot of writing about that, which I've gravitated towards, which is really interesting to me. There's a really good book that I'd recommend called DNA and the False Promise of Genetic Science, which is by Dr. Kim Tallbear. And she discusses like the implications of testing DNA and why tribes don't use it for determining enrollment. Because when I was a kid, my mom, she asked if we could do that because to our understanding, I'm like half Indigenous. So the tribe said it doesn't matter like where you come from genetically because it's based on this original census roll. So that's what's really frustrating to me, because people like me who are Indigenous, which so many things tie into who can claim Indigenous identity, and that's a whole other topic, but the blood quantum isn't about blood, which I think is part of why it's so devastating to me.
Stella, I mean, first, thank you so much for sharing with us. Just really, again, wonderful, and I appreciate you opening up about things that are difficult to talk about. And when we did a studio visit with you, you expressed just kind of complicated feelings around this and how much you even want to share. So thank you for your vulnerability, and it's amazing your clarity around things too. I think my question for you is just kind of tying in, you reflected on kind of the joy and radical joy as a strategy for managing the challenges. Can you talk more in depth about what that looks like in your studio? Like, what are your time rhythms? How long are you spending kind of in the challenging stuff? And when are you using the tools of joy and play and laughter as a strategy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'd like to better sort it out as I get further into my career, but I basically spent the whole past year or so just delving into the joyous part of art making. So that's when I started making all of these creatures that have narrative elements and incorporating beadwork into the 2D work. Because the work that I have been sharing with you today is very difficult for me to engage with. And I think I found that I don't want to just focus on the happy work, but it's also important to me to work towards these issues and try and find ways to advocate for other people who are experiencing the same thing. I think I kind of got sidetracked in answering that, but I focused on it too heavily for the happy art for the past year or so, and now it's been really helpful for me to kind of find a balance. So through this residency, I was able to work on like pieces that I had to go and research federal Indian policy for, and it would be difficult, and then I'd go make a creature that was going to go for this show at the Radius, and I think that was a really good balance of me like separating even the days into working in the morning on something challenging and then spending the afternoon like making creatures that each sorrow.
I also want to thank you for your poetry.
Oh, yeah.
It's beautiful. It really touches my heart. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stella, I have a question that kind of relates to the poetry. I mean, you really express yourself through a number of different mediums, and this
become so multidisciplinary are a little bit sad. Like in that poem that I read, I lost a cousin to addiction when I was in my first year of university, and then subsequently lost a friend to suicide, and my brother struggles with addiction, and during that time, I was trying to just make art about anything else. Like, I didn't want to engage with it at all. And then I went to therapy and all of the, because I also definitely believe in support through psychology. Like, I was pursuing a degree in psychology, and I went to therapy and all of that, but I wasn't able to find a way to, I guess, help myself process these things. So I started making artwork and poetry during that time that I didn't show anybody else, just as a way for me to work through these issues. And then I ended up like taking time away from school and really struggling with some mental illness. And that's when I wrote a lot more, and then came back to school and met a bunch of people from the art program and from the creative writing program that really helped me, like, I guess, sorry, emotional, connect that the work that I was doing wasn't just about me. Because like in the Crow Way, you grieve privately, so it's pretty hard to like share the work that I make that's painful for me. But then these friends that I made, like, I showed one of them, and then he said, like, oh yeah, this makes me feel better about this. And then I kind of slowly started sharing that work in classes with people, and got to a place where I realized that, like, even though it's really hard to talk about these issues, like, if someone had talked about it with me when I was younger, I think it would have helped me a lot. So in the future, I'm really hoping to integrate more of my poetry into my practice, because I focus very heavily on visual art. But yeah, I'm really excited. I'm going to publish a book through the Women's Studio Center in New York in October, so I'll hopefully be sharing more of it then. I think I just said the wrong name for that, but it's a WSW. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Stella, would you like to close with a reading? Any other of your poems?
Oh,
No pressure, but
sure.
an option.
Yeah, I have a big amount of poems that I brought. I wasn't sure like how long I would get into it. Maybe I'd read a sad poem and then a happy poem to end it.
Are they color coded?
Yeah, some like sad, happy. Well, I can't find the happy one. Okay, maybe I just read a sad poem. As a nice note to end on. So this one's called 27 Years, and it is about one of the most impactful days of my existence. Today I cut my mother's braid, tears in both of our eyes. It sits on my lap now as I drive, leaving my home behind us, not knowing when I will next see my family. My brother is lost in the poppies again. I'd go in there myself if it meant that I could find him, but I know that it would just mean we would both drown alone. So here I stand on the periphery, trying to call out his name, though I know he cannot hear me, not from inside, where hard edges are soft, memories are muffled, and the prick of a needle is not something to wince away from. A tear falls on my shoe, and if there's any symbolism in that, I don't know what it is. I saw him for a moment today, but he didn't come out. I don't know if he saw me too, through glazed eyes. But I did know I feel afraid, guilty almost, for asking him to come back. I don't know if he wants to remember, but I know he does not want to feel. After all, that's why he went in the first place. Yeah. Sad poem to end on, but